All right, we are gonna get started. So first things first, go to the website, do attendance. It's dsUprog.club, click meetings, it's there. Second thing, so tonight we're doing a demo, so you all need to go get the files. And there are two options for this. You can either, if you have Git installed and configured from our meeting earlier, you can just git clone our repo. Otherwise, go to github.com and you can download them as a zip and then open it in your preferred editor. It doesn't matter which way you do, so if you feel comfortable using Git, do it like that because it's faster. Otherwise, just go to the website, go to GitHub, download it. I'm pretty sure I made it public. I hope so. Otherwise, I'll have to fix that. But I will wait like a minute. You wouldn't have access to it. Nope, not this one. I'm the only. It's only me and then our overarching. So if you got it, then we're good.
Overarching like dsUprog account. Oh, because like the website doesn't want to check it. Okay, so you're good.
Yeah. Yeah, and then So once you get it, either from the command line cd into that directory. Otherwise, when you open it, you will see 4 files. Probably, I hope so. An index.html. There goes the projector. Oh, it's back. Maybe. Nope.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. It's not important slides right now. So there's an index.html file, a home.html file, a utils.js file, and a main.js file. Those first 3 I mentioned, index, home, and utils, we don't need to touch those right now. Feel free some other time on your own time, go look in there, go see what we did in those, but they're not important really for this demo right now. Main.js, that is the file we will be typing things into. So again, go feel free, look at those. Because the way we have this demo structured is there's a bunch of stuff in utils, which is how JavaScript you really have to do stuff, but we kind of like abstracted that stuff out to keep the meeting a bit simpler, but if you want to go see how it really works, go for it. So the things we're going to do is index.html is basically a login form. It doesn't like check a password against anything. It's just 2 text inputs. The styling on these 2 pages is very bare bones because I didn't want to do a lot of CSS for this. So the first thing we need to do is validate our login form. So we'll just check to make sure that the username and the password fields have things in them. And as long as they're both filled, then we can continue. After that, we're going to create a random number function because JavaScript does random numbers a bit weird. So we're going to modify the way they do it to fit our needs. And then using those random numbers, we're going to randomly draw rectangles to an HTML canvas element. Again, not important if you don't know what that means. It's okay. Just know we're going to be drawing squares, basically, of colors. And then we will sort an array that is full of a bunch of objects that I got from a website. They have API requests where you can just pull in like a bunch of fake dummy data. So I'm just using that. And then after we sort that array of objects, we will be inserting those objects into an HTML table. Again, if you aren't comfortable with HTML, that is fine. There's like 0 HTML interaction in this demo. So with that, everybody can open up the main.js file. As the projector isn't working right now, that's okay, because you can all see the presentation on the website. Assuming you all clicked on that button and it works. So if you are there, I don't know what slide this is. It's the first validate a form slide. It's the first slide with code on it. I think, yeah. Wait, am I open? Oh, I have this opened in a different. Oh, perfect. I'm going to do something quick. Okay, yes, so first slide with code. So for the form in JavaScript to interact with HTML, it has a method, it's the document object model. Again, not super important if you don't know what that means. Basically, we can reference like a paragraph tag as an object in JavaScript. So the way I have this set up is we have a form object. And the form object has a username and a password property. Those will be strings. And then there is an errors object, so you can do errors.username, which sets our error paragraph tag that I made, and then error.password, which sets the one for the password. And if you remember from last time, I said JavaScript and types are like kind of super fluid. So on this slide where I have the types there, that's more like what the data should be. Technically, you can put whatever you want there and JavaScript won't complain, but it also will probably not work as intended. Okay. Everybody is following along on their computers with the present. I'm going to try to go slower until this projector comes back, but we can work around the problem. We're flexible. Where's that?
USB-C.
So the first thing, I didn't name that function. Oh well. The first thing you need to do, I need to actually look at what this is supposed to be called. In your main.js file is, I made a typo. Make a function called validate data. I missed that on the slide. It just says function with data in the parentheses, but it needs to be called validate data for this to work properly because of the way I have things named. So do that in the main.js, and then we'll make a variable called valid, or whatever you want, I guess, at this point. It doesn't really matter. Oh, wait, I think my laptop is fixing this. Aha, there we go. So right there where it says function parentheses form, it needs to look like this. I forgot to add the name of the function. So name it validate data, like that. Capitalization and everything is important. Most other things you can name however you please, but function names need to be that.
If someone doesn't have anything downloaded all to edit their
yes,
JavaScript
to
file,
edit
what
the
should they
JavaScript
use?
file. So, assuming Windows, use Notepad, I guess. I don't think Windows comes with like a built-in terminal command line editor. You could probably find something, you might actually be able to edit it in GitHub. But that's,
I'd say Notepad.
yeah,
or
use
try Notepad plus
Notepad or VS Code would download in like a minute. And download VS Code and just open it in that.
They have WebStorm.
Yeah, WebStorm would work too.
Yep.
But yeah, Visual Studio Code from Microsoft is, I'd use that one because it downloads very quickly. You can just open it in there quickly. WebStorm is a bit of a bigger program and a bit more complicated, and VS Code will suffice these needs very okay. So I can pause for like a minute while people get caught up to where we're at right now. All right, so right now we have our function. And for those of you who might still be in 150 or 250, I think 250 you've covered functions by now, but a function is basically just putting code that can be executed like a bunch of times by just writing one line of code instead of a bunch. So that's how JavaScript is doing this. So the way this is working is our form has a button that submits the form, and when the form gets submitted, it calls our JavaScript function. So that's kind of what's happening in the back there. So once you have this function, we need to create this here variable. Let valid equal true. This means that right now, by default, our form is valid. We will be changing that with some if statements in a sec, but that's what that is for. So then we got this big if-else block. So what were the condition right there? Form.username.length. Form.username is getting the value of the username text box on the website. So again, form is that object that I have abstracted away in that other JavaScript file. So this is not exactly vanilla JavaScript, but you could easily do this on your own, or like a lot of like big frameworks reference things like objects like this too. And then length is just getting our length property of that string. So in C, you would call a length function like all by itself, and you'd have to pass in the string and it would like calculate it for you. In JavaScript, it's just a property, so it's just a number there. And then we're checking if it's less than 1. So if it's less than 1, that means the option is 0, which means that it is not there. If it's greater than 1, that means there's something there, so they've typed in their username, and that means they typed it, which is good. So inside of our if block, we set valid equal to false, because we have to make sure we keep track of that. And then form.error.username, we're passing an error message to the HTML. Again, form.error, not technically like straight out of the box JavaScript. I've typed that off in a separate file somewhere, but it's really easy to get to this point if you wanted to do it in your own file. And then we're just passing it a string to update it. Otherwise, what we want to do is make the error message nothing. Because otherwise, if say they click submit with nothing in either box, then both of the errors will show up. And then if they add like their username field, but they don't add a password field, when you click submit again, the form is still invalid, but you aren't clearing the error messages, so it would be confusing. So we have to make sure we set it to nothing. And then once you get that typed, you can copy and paste it and make another one.
Why do we not need the semicolon on the let valid equal true?
Oh, that's a great point. JavaScript doesn't have semicolons required, like C does. You can ignore them. So some of these files, there might be semicolons because my auto formatter would have added them. I don't type JavaScript with semicolons at all.
Go back to show it.
Yes, I can just scroll. So yeah, right here,
Yep.
There's no semicolon there. Because again, you don't need a semicolon if you want. I think I typed that line by myself, and then everything else I copy and pasted from my working file, which had been auto-formatted to add semicolons. But semicolons not required, except in for loops. You need semicolons there, but you don't need semicolons. It's argued that best practice is to add semicolons, but I'm lazy and I don't type semicolons because auto-formatters can do it for you. All right, so then after you get this second if-else block, it's the exact same thing, just change username to password and change your error message to as you please. And then we return valid. So if it gets through both of these if statements and valid is true, it passes true back, and then it means the form was correct and it moves us on. If valid is false, then it prevents the form from being submitted, and we stay on that page so the user can try to submit it again. So this in its entirety is our validate form or data function or whatever I called it. It's just a couple if statements. So differences again from C is we use like form.errors.username a lot. That isn't as much of a thing in C. It is there, but it's very prevalent in JavaScript. So now if we go to this here lovely demo, that's probably really tiny. Look at that, less tiny. So if I just click submit, there's no username and no password, so it gives me an error. I can't see my mouse, so I'm just, oh, there it is, never mind. But if I type something here, if I only type something there, our error below username goes away because we typed something there, but it still wants a password. I type in a password, it loads this page. Your page, when you log in, that table thing won't happen because we haven't done it yet. But And you might get some errors somewhere because we haven't defined all of the functions yet. But at this point, you should be able to get to this page. And if you want to just copy and paste code if you got confused and then ask us questions later, go for it if you want to be able to still follow along. And I will upload my completed main.js file into that GitHub repo so you can look at it again later.
What are the links?
They are... There. Oh, this is a different... Why is this one different?
It's the same. It's the same. If you see the
I know what I did.
HTTPS up in that get clone, that's the same.
Yep, same link.
Inside your internet browser.
I think I forgot
Same
to
place.
update the presentation with the image to the website. I have it locally. I will fix that, and it'll have the proper links very visible after the meeting. I don't want to do it right now because I'll put it in the meeting. Nick, add it to the meeting description. One of you Nicks, doesn't matter.
Okay.
All right, so our form validation is done. So now we want to do random numbers. So in C, random numbers, you call your random function. It gives you a giant random integer, and then you just mod it by whatever you want it to be smaller than. In JavaScript, a random number is a decimal between 0 and 1. So you will never get 2 from the normal math.random function in JavaScript. It's always a decimal. So what we want to use it for, we don't want decimals. The demo I have prepared, we're using integers. So decimals and integers, they are different, and we need to change it. So we're just going to write a pretty simple random function that uses the built-in JavaScript random function and then just makes it into an integer that we want. And it's just this many lines. So first, our function call, random int. You can name this one whatever you want, if I'm remembering correctly, or you can just name it the same so you don't get confused. So in JavaScript, our parameters, I notice I have set min equal to 0 and max equal to 100. In C, that's not how it works either. What these are is default values. So if I don't pass any parameters to this function, then inside of my function, min will equal 0 and max will equal 100. If I only pass one number, then min will be whatever that number is, and max will be 100. And if I pass two numbers, then min will be the first number, and max will be the second number. So you can have default values in JavaScript, and then C, if I wanted to write a function where I wanted it where I could accept one parameter or two parameters, you would need two functions. In JavaScript, you can just have one function, and the way this is those parameters are optional, so if I don't include it, the function will run just fine anyways. So then we do this. We call math.random, which gives us a decimal, and then we do this random math number formula. If I'm remembering correctly, in C, it's the same thing, but instead of multiplication, you mod, I think. Oh, yeah, that sounds right. So you just mod by 1 plus max minus min, and then you add min to that. But since this is a decimal, we can just multiply, and it gives us the same result. So after this, num is going to be a number between 0 and our max, but max plus 1 kind of, because it could be like if our max is 100, this number could be like 100.7. But we don't want that because our max is 100. So then what we do is we call math.floor on our number, which just floors it to it rounds down basically to the lowest close integer, so 100.7 is 100, and we just return that from our function. And then we have a random integer function that instead of returning a decimal, it now returns us an integer. So now we are going to use this random number to draw rectangles. So again, our HTML file, if you were on that page, there was that black square. That's our canvas element. You can draw text and shapes and lines and gradients, a bunch of stuff to it. You can go read docs later there if you want. But so there are 3 variables we can reference. I got these by using a JavaScript function that, again, you can go look at. But so what you can access is canvas. This provides like the length and the width of our canvas. CTX is the context of the canvas. This is how we will draw to it and like set colors and stuff. And then color option is the text box that you can type your own color into, which will make more sense in a little bit. So first we need to make our function. Function drawRect. This needs to be named like this for this to work. Unless you went and changed the HTML file. But that seems like too much work. And then the first thing we will do is get our color. So color option just represents the text box, like the actual text box on the HTML. So with that, we can like change how big it is and what color it is and a bunch of stuff like that. So we want the actual text value from that box. So color option dot value gives us the value of that. So right now, color is equal to the value in the text box. And then we need to make sure that if they don't add anything into that text box, we still make the box a fun color. So if color.length is less than 1, we will change the fill style of our context. So ctx.fillStyle, it's a property, not a method. And we will set it to colors and a random number. So colors is a predefined array I made. It's 5 strings. That's like red, orange, yellow, blue, and green, something like that. I think it's 6. There's purple in there too. It's just, I just made a random array of colors. And then the random integer function right there is giving us a random array. So we're starting at 0 because arrays are indexed at 0, and we're stopping at 5. So there's 6 elements, but since it starts at 0, 5 is the max. So random int 0, 5 will give us a random number between 0 and 5. And then that number is the index of our array. So if this returns 4, then colors 4 will be index 4 in this string array that I made. That's just 6 strings. But this is what happens if they don't type anything into the colors text box. If they do type something into that, well, then we're going to set our fill style to, that shouldn't say color.value. I changed some namings later. Just color right there. So ctx fill style equals color, and then we're setting it to whatever color the user wants. Yeah. So then we set our colors now. So our colors will be completely different. It won't always be black like the default color is. After which, we just need to use our random integer function a couple more times. So length and width, we are setting it to a random number. So since I only included 20, that means that I'm getting lengths and widths between 20 and 100. Because I passed it 20, so the minimum is 20. And then 100 is the default max. You could change that if you wanted to and make it like 300, and you'd get longer and wider rectangles. And then y and x will be the start position of our rectangle. So here, the minimum is 0. Since I'm only caring about max, but max is my second parameter, I still need to pass the first parameter so it knows what to do. And then 500 is the width and height of the canvas that I have right now. You could make it smaller or bigger. If it gets past 500, you won't be able to see it. But then if it gets smaller, then rectangles couldn't start right at 500, which would be the bottom right corner. And then you just call ctx.fillRect, and that is the included JavaScript function. You give it your x, your y, your width, and your length, and it draws you a colorful rectangle. Any questions? Is that making sense?
So I think, okay. I think it's possible that if you try to go over to the file right now and make this code work, it doesn't work right now. You need to add the next function first, the fill table.
Maybe.
It's mad because it's not defined.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it'll get angry at you. Well, mine works, so I'll still demonstrate what we just made. That does make sense. I didn't test this in phases. I just wrote the whole file at once to get everything to work. So here's my canvas. Here's our draw rectangle button. This button triggers the function we just wrote. So that's how this is working. And then here's my text box. So right now I don't have anything in there, and this is hopefully going to draw a rectangle. Look at that, we got a red rectangle right there. And then if we do it again, we got an orange one down there. And then if I add a color, which can be hex values in this box, it will draw a new rectangle to the color I have specified. And then if I delete this again, it'll draw more rectangles of random colors. So there's what we wrote that will work after we make this next function. All right, so now we're doing this last function. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm just using a random API service that gives me a big list of data. It's just random data that some guy made or something, I don't know. But so we have this array of objects of people. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort this data. It's an array of objects, so we're going to sort it by the person's last name. And then once we sort it, we're going to put it into our table. And just for reference, this is what we get. This is what a person object looks like. So first name, last name, email, it's all strings. This isn't super important. These are the only 3 fields we are working with, is the top 3. First name, last name, and email. So the rest of this isn't super important. I included it so you could look at it. All right, so we're going to make a fill table function that accepts a data parameter. That data will be this data that we are going to be sorting. So then what we are going to do, so data is an array. Just think of it like an array. We want to sort this array. So instead of needing to write a bubble sort or some other convoluted sort algorithm, we can just use the one that JavaScript made for us, which easily could just be a bubble sort in the background, but then we don't have to write it, which is good. So data.sort, it's calling a method sort on data, which is any array. Any array has this sort function. I didn't write it. And then inside of the sort function, we pass a new function. This function doesn't need a name. You can just write function, and it accepts a parameter A, which is the element you're at right now, and then thing B, the next one. And so the way this works is data.sort runs sort, and then it checks this function. By default, if you don't put anything there, it sorts it all based off of characters. So if you call sort on an array of numbers, it will sort them very strangely because it will sort them as strings. It won't actually sort them in numerical order. Like it sorts 8 after 12 because 12 as a string is less than 8 as a string. So if you need to use numbers, don't just call sort and leave it as is. That won't work. So since we are sorting an object, we don't want to just have it make it a string and sort it like that. So we have to define our own. So how you do this is, I'm going to skip steps. No, I'm not. So we make some if statements. Return this sort function from the function you write. It either wants a 1 or a -1 or a 0, I guess. 1 means that A should go before B. So it should stay as it is. If you return a negative value, not just -1, a negative value, then it needs to flip so that B goes before A. So if you were doing this for a number like numbers, you would just return like A minus B. So if A is bigger than B, you'd get a negative number and it'd flip them if needed. So we just have to check. In JavaScript, you can do this less than with strings. In C, it breaks. You need to call a special function. In JavaScript, the less than and greater than operators are defined over strings, so it works just fine. So if A last name is less than B last name, so if the first last name is less than our second last name, we're returning 1, which means we're fine. That's the order we want. But if the first one is bigger than the second one, we return a -1 so that the sort function flips them. And then otherwise that means they're the same thing. We return 0 and that means they're the same and they can stay as is. So that is our sort function in its entirety. Hopefully that made sense. And what you could do also is instead of defining your function right in the sort method call, you could write that function like at the top of your program and then say we called it like sort strings. Then you could do data.sort, and then in those parentheses, just call sort strings. And then it would pass it like that. So if you wanted to make your code a bit cleaner, or you needed to use this function like 3 or 4 times, you could do it like that instead. You don't have to put it right in here like that. So then what we're doing is we want to put it in the table. So sorted data is our new sorted array. Note the sort function sorts it in place, doesn't make a copy. So data is also sorted now. If you wanted to keep an unsorted array and a sorted array, you'd have to duplicate it prior. Some JavaScript functions make copies, this one doesn't. Just a note. So we want to loop over this array. In C, we would do like for in I is less than our elements I++, and then do it like that, which you can do in JavaScript. That's perfectly fine. But you can also just use this for each function, which is, it's just a for loop. And then it gives you E is the element. So for every single element in this array, we're doing this stuff. And all we're going to do is, that should say const row equals curly brackets. Another typo. Yeah, my bad. So const row curly brackets, we're defining an object. This would be similar to those of you who are in 250 to a structure in C. Similar concept. So we're just saying that our first name, the names of all of these things is important, by the way. In this example, when I say important, it's just because my other file references these by name. It actually doesn't matter in real JavaScript if you are writing everything by yourself, but these are just the variables I'm referencing. So those names are all important. So first name is the first name of that element, last name is the last name of that element, and email is the email of that element. And then we call this insert row function that I wrote. It just does some HTML stuff, not super exciting. I copy and pasted like 6 times. So what this function does, I have steps like that, yeah. So all that function did is, for every single thing in our array of 10 things that we have sorted, it calls this function for all of them. So this, like each iteration of the loop doesn't have a clue that it's going to keep going for every other element in the array. It just does it for that one, and then it loops to the next one. So again, it's a for loop, just with like less steps is what I said earlier, because you don't have to manage the index. It does that for you, and you don't have to, yeah. So now we have this whole file that at this point should do everything it's supposed to. Not counting typos that I have made, because there will probably be some of those. I'll upload, again, my working one that I use on this example. I'll upload that to GitHub, and then you can look at it if you want. But that's what this one is. So with this now, we refresh the page, and we have a table sorted by last name. If you notice, it took it a sec to show up, and that's because this is like a live API call. So whenever you load this page, your computer goes to the website, it requests this array, and then it has to wait a sec for that data to get back to your computer so your computer can do the stuff. So that's why it isn't there instantly. It still has to go get the data, and then it can write it.
I just wanted to add that mine wasn't working for a while, and then I changed something, it worked. I changed it back, it worked, it still works. So it might just not work sometimes, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
I click the boxes and everything, but if I click the buttons, it doesn't do anything.
Did you name your function the right thing? Because that specifically needs to be named properly. Your draw rectangle function needs to be named that. That's just a thing off the top of my head. I have no idea if that's what you did wrong. That's just the first thing that comes to my mind.
Well, yeah, that was basically the same problem I had. The button just didn't work, but I have no idea what caused it.
Yeah.
Like the button, it'll bring me to the second page, but it won't pop up with like the errors or anything.
Yeah.
Don't you have to use a web server to do this?
I'm running it just locally, fine. Oh yeah, I never told you guys how to open this file. You can just double click on it. It should open in your browser. On index, click on index.
Double click on index.
And it opens in your browser. And your browser can just read this HTML file. And this could be an example of the way JavaScript can sometimes be interesting. So theoretically, at least some of you, I hope, have a working version of this. If not, again, I can upload the working file and you can go peruse it later. But so because I want to cover this a little, I'm calling it behind the scenes, even though you can just go look at the file. This is a few examples of what I did in that utils.js file to make it a bit easier in this main file. So to get our form and the form values, document is built into JavaScript. I didn't make that. Document.forms built into JavaScript. I didn't make that. Indexing this array at form is the ID of the HTML element that I made. So then the capital F form is that form element. And then I can access the different things in it based off of their name. So like if you've taken Web 1 or are taking it right now, you like name your form fields. So that's what this is doing. And then to get like this one, document.getElement by ID, it gets it again by its JavaScript or HTML ID. So that's kind of what I did. Again, you can go look at that. That isn't super important for tonight. That wasn't the stuff I was trying to cover. So other than if it doesn't work, we can figure that out later. Any overarching JavaScript questions? If you feel like learning more JavaScript, you can take, I think it's CIS 275.
Sorry, you're talking about web apps 1 and 2?
Or is it CSC? It's not a thing anymore.
They've changed it.
It was called that when I took it.
CSC 334.
That one. That teaches this stuff, HTML and JavaScript. Otherwise, w3schools.com is like really good website. I think I have a couple projects I've made where when I needed to sort a table, I just copy and pasted their sort table function and did it.
Why does one program require 4 files?
So this is down to how JavaScript works. So JavaScript by itself, unless you're running it on a server, actually can't really do much. It needs a website interface. So those 2 HTML files, that builds, this button is in the HTML file, and this table is the HTML file. That isn't really like a program. That would be just more like dragging boxes around in a PowerPoint. It's kind of like that. And then technically, if you wanted to, that other JavaScript file I wrote, you could put that in the file you guys just made and then do the same thing. I just put it in a separate file so we didn't have to worry about it. So technically, it only needs the one JavaScript file, and then it needs those HTML files because it's a website. JavaScript is for web.
And then why are there the 2 separate HTML files?
Those are different pages. So index.html is just the login page. So when the form gets submitted, it has to redirect to a new page. So that's what the other one is. You know, like how websites is /about us and /shop. Those are different pages. They're different files so that when you go to it, the browser actually loads your new page.
Another way to explain the relationship between HTML and JavaScript is HTML, kind of like Aaron said, gives you the skeleton. So that button, that table, that box, all those things are built with HTML, but on their own, if you just click the button,
It
it won't do anything. So HTML builds the things, and then JavaScript gives those things functionality to
I think an
actually do
analogy I
something.
figured out last time was almost HTML is like the bones in a body. CSS, which makes this not look ugly, I didn't even talk about that, but that's like the skin. And then JavaScript is like the muscles and the brain and the spleen, and it's like everything else. Without JavaScript, websites could do very, very little. So JavaScript is the logic behind like a website and how that does basically everything. Hopefully that makes sense.
Also, technically, you only need one file because you can put the JavaScript in as a string in the HTML file.
Yeah.
Well, not a string.
But
You just
yeah,
put it inside.
you can technically do that.
It's just easier if you
Mhm.
have more files.
Yep. Yeah. C and JavaScript, if you use them for the same thing, you're doing something very wrong. Writing C for a website is complicated and annoying, and you have to like use a WebAssembly, and it's super weird. JavaScript, if you use JavaScript to write a game or an operating system, it like the game would be kind of janky, and your operating system wouldn't work because JavaScript like needs an operating system. So they serve different purposes. You wouldn't do what you do in C with JavaScript. I mean, other than like assignments and classes, you can do all that stuff usually. But yeah, they serve different purposes. You wouldn't use them for the same thing.
I just kind of wanted to point out that one basic thing to connect HTML and JavaScript that's being done in this, but we didn't talk about it, is if you go into the home.html file and then find the button, that on-click equals draw rect line there, that part is the entirety of the thing that makes it so that when you make that draw rect function, it does that when you click the button.
That line right there is what Nick is talking about. Yes, so yeah, if I had deleted this on-click draw rect, when you clicked that button, absolutely nothing would happen. It would look like you clicked it because that's built into HTML, but it wouldn't do anything. So when you click the button, it calls our drawing rectangle function, which is why you had to name it the way you did, because that's what I called it in this HTML file. So if you called it something else, it would look for a function that doesn't exist and nothing would happen. So then another link, this is how we're getting those files into our HTML. I'm including them there at the bottom. And I had to put this one above this one because if I put this one on top, it wouldn't be able to reference anything that I had already done because this basically just plants all of this JavaScript file right in here. So yeah, that's kind of how this works. Again, like I think I said last time I talked about JavaScript, we all think web dev is like super useful and important because it's the easiest way to make a project that isn't just command line based because you don't have to learn a complicated like graphical user interface library. You just learn simple HTML. We'll be covering more web stuff probably throughout the year.
Yeah,
Because
to add on
you think
to
it's
Aaron
good.
with the web dev, you know, when I was interning at Unitech this last summer, just kind of a taste of the real world, a lot of those projects were all, like almost all the staff was working on web dev of some sort for the most part, because a lot of those clients that you'll be building, that you'll be programming for will usually be with their websites as, you know, this world becomes more and more connected via the network and stuff. So yeah, like you're not, web dev won't be going away anytime soon. And once you kind of get a good grasp of it, it's pretty fun to work with. So, but it takes a learning curve for sure.
So, you all need to take electives, assuming you're all computer science majors. You need to take electives. I'd recommend at least Web Dev 1. I'm assuming Hanamiko still teaches it.
Yeah.
He does a good job of teaching you how to do this stuff. Because you'll get into JavaScript and you'll learn about jQuery, which makes JavaScript and working with HTML a bit less awful. Because it's kind of awful by default. Yeah. But then also like our programming club website is made with like a big JavaScript library framework that we're probably going to talk about like later in the year. But so JavaScript is full of things that you can do with it. But I'm going to assume that's the last of the questions, unless somebody has one. And that can conclude our meeting. Hey, Nick, what are you talking about next week?
Something fun. To be determined. We'll put it.
It'll go on the website as soon as we know.
Yep. And
Probably tonight, because that's what we did last time. We didn't know what we were going to do.
exactly right.
So we'll do something good next week too. According to Nick, it'll be fun.
That's right. So don't
Heard it from him first.
don't skip just because it's me.
All right. Our competitions, we do them every other week, and they only last a week because Caddis only lets them last a week. So it ended like tonight at 6, and then next week we'll have a new set of questions up for those who care.
Second. We have a winner.